Hello and welcome to today's session from CPD Chat. In this session, we will look at an approach to incorporating wider reading into the English curriculum, which I've coined link reading. This is based on an idea and concept that I came across during the closure that I'm not just incorporating into my own base school, but I wanted to share with you. Although it says English curriculum, that's because that ties into my subject specialism. However, this session is suitable also if you are in another subject, or if you're a literacy coordinator looking at a whole school reading approach, or it will also link well into the primary setting. My name is Nikki Goodman, and I am second in English at Cedars Upper School and also an SLE for the Chiltern Learning Trust. So when we're looking at the concept of wider reading, I found a really useful document by the Department for Education that was published in May 2012 called Research Evidence for Reading for Pleasure. In the report, it highlights research and studies about facts and statistics with reading for pleasure, as well as strategies or points that classroom practitioners, as well as teaching and learning leads, might want to bring and raise forward into their own schools and consider. Two pieces from this document is the trends in reading for pleasure, which I found really interesting, that the evidence suggests that the majority of children enjoy reading, and we can see that in our classrooms, that when we're reading that class text, that they really engage with the ideas and the themes and the situations of the characters and events placed within them, that they really enjoy unpicking why writers use certain word choices and how that brings a certain aspect or element into their imagination and come to life. We can also see, by looking at the fourth bullet point, that age affects attitudes to reading and reading behaviour, that children enjoy reading less as they get older. We might see this time and time again at parents' evenings, where when we're looking at maybe the older part of the primary years, as well as going into the secondary sector, that we see that parents are asking us for reading lists, that they're saying that they're struggling at home to get their children to read for pleasure or independently, that they buy them books for Christmas that they never pick up. Also, that coincides with the next bullet point. The majority of these parents might be the parents of boys, that there are other interests or hobbies that they want to partake in and don't want to sit down and read a fiction book from cover to cover. We can see that children and reading for pleasure has changed over time, that children do not necessarily now read for pleasure. They are doing it to process and gain information. That might be with the influence as well of social media, that children are just accessing and getting what they need to inform them of the world around them quickly, and maybe even just through an image or maybe for a few words. This means that they're not necessarily enjoying what they're reading. Also, that culture maybe is not necessarily supported at home or in the classroom to encourage them to do this. So when looking at wider reading, we might then have that parent or that child say, what other books can I read, miss? How can I then read and improve my reading skills at home? So it's not uncommon in schools to find a reading list such as this, that we have an alphabetized list of texts that children could read outside of the curriculum and read at home. We can also see that maybe when they go to find these books, these are types of venues and situations that they would find themselves in. That library, for some of us, we see that as a paradise of the greatest works of fiction on the shelves. But when we look at this maybe from a student's perspective, that reading list is overwhelming. Maybe they think they have to read them in alphabetical order, or look at it and think, I'm never going to complete that, so why should I begin? Or the question, which of these books would be good for me then? Although I've got the authors and I've got the book titles, how do I know that I'm going to find that book interesting until I pick it up? And then I pick it up and I don't find it interesting. So why should I bother? When we look at the images from the student's perspective on the right, an overwhelming amount of books in one place, that if they just wander aimlessly up and down, how do they know that book cover is going to grab them? How do they know that the material inside is going to be suitable for them or challenge them? So suddenly, when we look at certain strategies we might already have in place or assume we have in place as a school or as an English department, we might find that these strategies don't necessarily work for the students to encourage them to read for pleasure, let alone to read outside of the classroom. So something that was mentioned in the LD EduChat by Bob Cox called Challenging for English was the concept of link reading. He talked about pupils read, the benefits and impact of reading, not just on the subject of English, but across the curriculum and into their daily life as well. He said that when it's called wider reading, it feels like it's an extra add-on. It implies that you might get around to it, that you only get to do wider reading if you've read what's in class and understand it, therefore maybe implying again that it's for those more able students or voracious readers, and if you're struggling, that it might not be for you. What Bob Cox was highlighting was linking the reading they're doing in class to the world around them. So for example, if you're reading a Shakespearean tragedy in class, what themes or ideas does that bring up? And then what other works of fiction and non-fiction does that link to or relate to? So rather than calling it wider reading, what I set up this year, and I'm still developing, is the concept of link reading. So rather than on my scheme of learning, rather than on the material that I give to students, rather than calling it wider reading, calling it link reading. And suddenly, even though it says maybe a sense of semantics going on with those phrases, we can see that when it says link reading, it's connecting to what they're getting in the curriculum. So also when thinking about this process of link reading, I also question the sense of inclusivity from the BAME work that the Chiltern Learning Trust were doing as well. And as you can see across the Key Stage 4, it's very hard to see where there are the inclusive texts, that we have got those white male writers. So also when looking at this idea of link reading, I also wanted to link it to the idea of inclusivity and the idea that a great work of fiction can come from any writer, from any background or any gender. It's a great work of fiction, no matter where it comes from. So in terms of the link reading placemat was created and is still being created for every single topic that we cover and teach across year 9, 10 and 11. So we've included a blend of fiction and non-fiction texts. The fact that non-fiction can be just as vital and be read for pleasure, especially when we're looking at items from the Observer or Guardian, those opinion pieces, so that the students, in particular boys, might feel that that non-fiction text type might be more relevant and realistic for them, that rather than reading a whole fictional novel. You can see that we've categorized the novel. So rather than the A to Z alphabetized, the fact that they're under the thematic links to the text, so the one on the screen you can see is for Macbeth. We took 4 key themes from Macbeth and then thought about other texts and text that show these thematic links. What you'll see as well that there's this chili pepper scale. The fact that red means that they're challenging, the orange means mid-challenge, and green, low challenge. By low challenge, it might be that the vocabulary is appropriate for a lower reading age, not necessarily that the ideas or concepts are less challenging. When you look across this placemat, you will see that they connect to maybe other writers from across the key stage 4 or 5 curriculum, so the next link up. You can also see that they do include inclusive writers. So rather than just Charles Dickens, for example, we also have Toni Morrison and Gaston Leroux being recommended as part of that thematic link. What you'll see is that all the titles for the texts are in blue and underlined. This is because they are hyperlinks. So when we share these placemats to the students, they will be interactive, so they can click on the link and either find an online version or a place to purchase this book, in particular for maybe parents that want to then purchase the text rather than necessarily just look at the library service. So these placemats in essence are a really good idea, and some of you at this point might be thinking that's a really good way forward in the English curriculum, that's something I'd like to develop. But developing the placemats are time consuming, and therefore you want to make sure that they are reinforced and supported, not just by the team, but across the school, maybe by the librarian, but also it becomes a part of the culture of the school. So rather than just displaying them in a corridor or a display in your English classroom, what you might want to do is, because of the hyperlinks, you might want to use your social media platform of your school, so your Twitter feed, to be able to showcase them to the parents as well as the students. So for example, year 10 are studying Macbeth this term, and therefore here are some other texts they might enjoy at home to read alongside this and see how those themes and ideas develop in other works of fiction themselves. So I hope this session has been useful in terms of how you can then look at wider reading from a different point of view and perspective. And if you request at the end of the session to have a copy of this PowerPoint, what you'll see is that you'll be able to then use the hyperlinks across to find that document from the DV and also be able to use the hyperlinks on the placemat. I want to leave with final thoughts in terms of this link reading journey. The first thought is a really interesting quote that I came across in a test article. The full version of this article you can access by again clicking the hyperlink that is in blue on the PowerPoint slide. Jennifer Webb said that there's an assumption that when it comes to diverse literature, pupils can't access challenging texts. We're not asking for diverse texts because our kids can't access Shakespeare. So when we're thinking about the inclusivity and the demographic of your school, the reading placemat should not necessarily be just easier building bridges into Macbeth. They are looking also to aspire them to Macbeth and beyond. So looking at maybe a diverse, maybe more modern version, but has themes rooted in Macbeth. With Jennifer Webb, you can also follow her blog, Funky Pedagogy, and also she has created a book, How to Teach English Literature in Overcoming Cultural Poverty. So that idea that no matter the background of the students in our classroom, there is that sense of aspiration and challenge through engagement. The other final thought would be, if you haven't already done so, by clicking on the link, you can be taken to the LD EduChat that you can find on YouTube that Bob Cox did on Challenging English. This is where he introduces the concept of link reading and his thoughts on the term wider reading, as well as other amazing strategies that he puts in place on how to challenge and pitch up English. For example, how to look and pick apart certain texts. And again, he uses examples not just from a secondary point of view, but also from primary. I hope today's CPD chat has got you thinking about different and more creative ways of incorporating wider reading in your English department and beyond. Thank you very much. Goodbye.